What's up, YouTube audience? This is a scary day for me. I've had therapy before, in real life, and I've given poker therapy before as well. I've even written a book called Poker Therapy, but it's really different when you're the one on the leather couch, or leather office chair, as it were. With me is Carrot Corner mental and technical game coach, Sebastian Wen. How's it going, Sebastian?
I'm well, thanks. I'm excited for this. I'm a little nervous as well. I've never done therapy in such a public way before. So I'll be interested to see how this goes, but I'm very happy you've agreed to do it.
Yeah, you've probably never had such an A-list celebrity client before.
You never know, man. I live in Toronto. Like I could be seeing Drake or something.
That's confidential, of course, though.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You'll never know that.
Yep. Okay, so the reason I want to do this is that my technical game and my understanding of the game and my sort of coaching game and video making game is a lot stronger than my mental game when I'm playing poker. So when I'm playing poker, I feel like a kind of shadow of who I know I could be. I feel like I'm really underperforming. But I don't want to say too much more because I've already filled in a kind of new client form for you today, which you've read. So I'll let you sort of take it from here. We're going to talk about some hands, but where should we begin?
Well, I want to begin even with just the way you said that, Pete. When you said that when you play poker, you feel, I saw you take this big, deep breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell that there is a lot of stress and pressure around what it means to be a winning poker player, a successful poker player, a player that is at the standards, the expectations you have of yourself. And so one of the things I want to explore with you today is where those expectations come from, where those pressures come from, and what failure means for you. Like, what is the monster under the bed here that is driving all of this fear? Obviously, it's not the money, right? And it's probably not entirely, the branding or anything like that either. So I want to know a little bit more about where that big deep breath is coming from.
I think it comes from less about what I think of me, because while I do have doubts about myself sometimes, I'm also very self-assured as a person generally. And when I'm playing my best, and when I'm like vibing with a student, and when I'm like talking with another coach or something, I really back myself to think about the game. So I don't think it actually comes from a place of like, shit, what if I'm not good enough? I think it comes from a place of people don't like me, or people think I'm I'm less able to do my job than I think I am. I think it comes from like the pressure of being it's kind of funny. I don't want to say like a public figure, because this is cracking me up now, because I just went on a stag do, and when I was behaving quite embarrassingly in front of all of my friends and one of them started filming it, I was like, hey, I'm a public figure, you can't do that. And we all laughed. So it's not that I think I'm like mega famous, but I do think that there are eyeballs, and there are more eyeballs than there were before. The YouTube numbers are growing. The company is growing. We're higher profile than we were, and I'm the face of the company, And sometimes the comment section, places like that on the internet, places where one probably shouldn't want to spend tons of time or want to be regularly, there's a nasty dark side to that. Like, as you grow, there are people that don't like you. And I've never had many people that don't like me in life. Maybe I've just not associated with those people, but I've always been pretty popular and liked by family and friends and inner circles in my community. And I'm not very used to not being liked. I'm not very used to being judged and berated and things like that. Because the interesting thing here is that when I'm making YouTube content and it's controlled and I'm going over a hand, I feel fine. But as soon as the hand's coming at me in real time in front of that Twitch audience, and that's where I want my volume to be, then I feel like the eyeballs in the background, like the red eyes kind of like glowing there.
Okay, great. I have some thoughts about that, but do you want to get into this hand first and then we'll address those?
Yeah, so this is a great example of that. So I wrote down on your initial new client form that one of the things I wanted to work on, or maybe I didn't write this down, but I intended to, was fear during a hand, a fear of the eyeballs, a fear of looking bad, right? A fear of what other people are thinking. And it's so weird because I'm never normally like that in other walks of life. Like, I feel like I keep wanting to stress this to you. I'm not a self-conscious person in general. It's just like in this environment that it started happening. And maybe it's been happening for some time. So with this hand with aces, this villain here in the cutoff who opened was actually in the chat of the stream. And he wasn't like a troll demon, you know, sitting there berating me. He was just a nice guy that's part of the community that was playing the hand against me. But with that comes a little bit more pressure or like adversarial sort of dynamic or something. I describe a lot of what happens to me at poker as like a loss of objectivity and being drawn into like subjective states, whether they be emotional or even just like rational subjective states, if that makes sense. I call this 4-bet with aces. My main rationale at the time was it's more likely this opponent is over bluffing than under bluffing, because who doesn't want to get into a 4-bet pot on the stream?
Sure.
We get this flop of king, queen, 10. And immediately here, even though nothing's really happened yet, I was like, God damn it, of course one of the bad flops races has to come, so I can't stack this guy and look good on stream. And this thought was fucking weird, because I'm like, if I'm playing this spot off stream, or like back in the days when I played more poker, I'd be pretty ambivalent to what the texture would come. I wouldn't be getting upset every time a texture came less than ideally for pocket aces. Villain goes ahead and c-bets the flop, and I think the only play is call with this hand. I think it's quite mediocre, but certainly at 5-1 is very far from a fold. The turn brought 4 straight, and now I felt pretty indifferent against this small bet. We do have outs to the jack. I think the jack is heavily blocked. These are all things I'm saying in game. Like, I think the jack out is often just in the opponent's hand already, making a straight. Sometimes it's not. And now my main thought at the time, I was timing down here, was like, how the hell do I play this spot? Like, I definitely don't want to raise. I don't think I want to fold, but like, it's kind of grim. And then I thought, okay, I think a really great exploit here against a normal community member at 100 NL is to call this turn bet and bluff jam the river. And the reason I wanted to do that was that in this player's range is going to be a lot of mergy stuff. There's going to be sets galore. There's going to be some jack X. There's going to be some 2-pair. There's going to maybe be some merges that I beat if villain isn't really sure how to go here with ace king. But I do block that quite heavily. And there might even just be some out and out bluffs like ace 4 suited here. Again, I block, but may give up river. So I think call is the way to go. And then my plan was fully that if villain checked the river here, I was all in, because I felt their range was too comprised by 2-pair and sets. And although I thought I would have some showdown value on this node, I felt that the fold equity would outperform that. And I had a very clear, what I'd call or maybe what Descartes, the philosopher, would call a clear and distinct idea. He thought they came from God because they just felt so genuine. I think they come from subconscious competence. I think they come from A-game. And I had this idea resonating inside my head at this time. Villain then checked, and I felt the eyes on me. I felt the pressure building. I began to construct excuses not to jam. Things like, well, he could trap here. He could be doing fancy play stuff. Well, you know, he might not fold with king queen in this spot because like people are bad at folding absolute hand strength. The excuses started coming, but these thoughts didn't feel like a clear and distinct idea. They felt like fear. And I checked back and was completely unsurprised by the showdown. And as I went downstairs after the stream, this was somewhat near the end of the stream, I was making a coffee and I was thinking, why on earth did you not just like follow through on that good reasoning that you were so happy with on the turn? So I think this hand really is a good example of like the eyeballs getting to me and the demons kind of winning.
So when you feel the eyeballs getting to you, what do you think is the emotional tag you would give that experience? Would you call it anxiety? Would you call it self-consciousness? Would you call the thought of failure shame? Like what's the
temptation to avoid shame, like the defense mechanism against potential shame in the near future, something like that. I think shame is what strikes a card the most there.
Okay, so the fear of shame. And when you're experiencing that, are you able to tell me what it feels like physically, like what it's like to be in your body? When you see that flop come out and you go, this is not going to be a great opportunity to avoid shame. What's happening physiologically?
There's like a activity level is rising, energy level is rising. There's like more, like it's almost like more molecular vibration, if that makes sense, just everywhere.
Mm.
And it feels like there's also a, this is more psychological accompaniment, but there's a sense of dread that's beginning to build. And I feel silly right now saying this, because this is obviously such a mundane spot that when I'm playing on my own, I wouldn't feel, or when I was playing back in the day, I wouldn't feel, but there's just something about this environment that I need to conquer that makes me feel this way. And it starts right here. That sense of shame or dread begins right here. And by the time it's at the river, I think it's been bubbling away and brewing and growing. And I'd describe it as there's like the real poker player part of me is fighting back against it and is having epiphanies about what's good here and how to exploit and how to play well. But that's just bubbling, getting louder and louder and louder. And by the river, it's quite hard to overcome it.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting that you say, you know, the spot is so mundane, but as you've been suggesting, the situation that you're in streaming for a huge audience is not mundane. It's a situation most people will not experience. And the level of stress, Pete, that I see people, well, not necessarily in my personal life, but just it seems to be the case that being a public figure makes people crazy. Like, it's not an easy thing to do. It's a massively, massively, massively stressful. And so to combine that with poker, it's no wonder that what for you would be another day at the office if you were offline is an entirely different beast right now. Yeah.
It's weird though, because I can thrive under those circumstances if I'm in A game mode, which does happen sometimes where the funny thing is, Sebastian, if I'm winning, if I start by crushing for 3.5 buy-ins in 10 minutes in a session, all of that goes away.
Well, you've some part of you is telling yourself that you don't need to be kept safe anymore by these feelings, right? There's no need to feel this fear because you're not in danger, because you're winning, right? Yeah. Dread is something that you mentioned. Is there a way of defining how you experience dread? Do you know in your body if you were to feel dread, if you felt dread in the past, maybe outside of poker, what does that look like for you? What does that feel like?
Like lots of fleeting, half-baked thoughts and tension. So a few years back, I put this down on the initial client form before I fixed I don't want to say I'm fixed 100% because I'm not. And like what we're talking about today is one area where I can still improve, right? But like if you were to meet me 5-6 years ago, I don't know if I'd have been able to have this call with you because the anxiety level would be so intense that the physical sensation of not being able to breathe, of like my chest tightening, would be so extreme that I wouldn't be able to do it. I had a therapist 2 therapists ago. Like I have a good therapist now that I don't really see regularly anymore because I don't really feel that I need to, and neither does he. Before that, I had a therapist who wasn't right for me. And every time I walked into her place where she conducted the therapy, I would be unable to breathe. Like really, really shallow breathing, like clenching in my chest. And if we go back to like COVID time, 2020, I took on a lot of students. I took on way too many students, in fact. And during coaching sessions, I would experience the dread of having to do a coaching session because I'd burned myself out. I wasn't leaving the house. I wasn't exercising properly. It was COVID misery. I'm sure you remember what lockdown 2020 was like initially. And I'd reach a point at the start of the session where I'd be dreading having to do another coaching session so much that I wouldn't be able to breathe. And I'd have to get up and walk about the room to be able to breathe a bit better. And that would help slightly. It would alleviate it a little bit, but it wouldn't help that much. I was also diagnosed with asthma as a kid. And I think for a lot of my life, I mistook anxiety and like stuff I inherited from my childhood for asthma, when in fact it was a physiological reaction to dread and anxiety and not feeling safe. So I think that's something that when I'm experiencing one of these stream sessions where I'm like, man, I'm feeling this pressure, I'm not able to think clearly, it's usually accompanied by some kind of like physical chest tightening sensation. But not as bad as it was like in years gone by, but still there to some extent sometimes.
Yeah, and that trauma from childhood and anxiety, those two things are so commonly interlinked that it's just like one to one, for sure. And definitely something that gets better, but not necessarily, some people are just going to have anxiety as part of the way that they exist in the world. And it's a question of kind of negotiating it and recognizing it and making friends with this roommate of yours, right?
Hmm.
Um, so the dread is something that you're familiar with. You know what it feels like. You felt
Hmm.
it many times before. And it sounds like you can feel it coming on in the hand. You're conscious of it, right?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the things that I prescribe to people who feel like they're choking in particular spots in the game is the key is you can't do this all of the time, but if there's a way for you to recognize these emotions coming on, making some of the time resource that you have in the hand, devoting that to resetting your mental game, which we'll talk a little bit about how to do,
Hmm.
is really, really critical. Because you can use your whole time bank, but if you haven't gotten yourself to a place where you can think critically and kind of allow that anxiety to take a back seat rather than a front seat, then you could it's totally irrelevant, right? Even if you were thinking for 3 minutes. So the real question is how to identify these moments when your emotional side is taking over. And that's why I try to talk about the body sensations, trying to become more conscious of what this emotion actually means rather than just, well, I behaved in a way that was strange, so I must have been feeling something, right?
Hmm.
Um, so do you think that you have the tools necessary already to notice these emotions coming on at the start of a hand?
Yep.
Or, yeah,
Yep.
okay,
So
great.
it's really funny that like if you read Poker Therapy, the book I wrote like several years ago, 2019, I knew less about psychology than I do now, and I'm still not like a practicing clinician like you. Like I don't know as much about it, but I happened to guess right that part of the thought process had to be cordoned off to getting into the better mental state before the majority of the time was invested. This is literally part of
Mhm.
my protocol that I teach to students in my own mental game work, and this is why it's so obscene. And therapists having therapists and all of this stuff that goes on, where just because you can help someone else with it doesn't mean you can actually do it for yourself, right?
Of course,
So
yeah.
awareness I don't think is really my problem. I think it's just because I am feeling self-conscious, I'd rather pretend I'm not feeling that way when on stream rather than go, okay guys, I'm feeling a bit of dread here. Like it's unnatural for a human, especially like a male human who's grown up in the
Hmm.
90s or whatever, to actually just want to go, I'm going to be honest with the Twitch audience here and say to them, I am experiencing physiological symptoms of anxiety and dread. They're like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? King Queen 10 came down. You have aces. Like, grow up, be a poker player. It's extremely weird to do that in front of an audience. And so I think my brain dismisses it before I even get the chance to think to do it, even though I know that that's how I would teach a student in this exact situation.
Okay, great. So I'm hearing in there, like in CBT, we would kind of call like assumptions that that I would put pressure on. Um, when you say that if you were to tell the audience, I'm going to use some mindset techniques here to reset because I can feel an emotion coming on. What percentage of them do you really think are going to say, grow up and be a man and be a better professional poker player? You
Just
know?
the troll demons I don't really care about anyway on an analytical level. Like when I say
Right.
troll demons, I'm stealing this from Jordan Peterson, right? He's sort of his
Okay.
word for the people that lurk on the internet,
Yeah.
posting things without ever fully being known by name or face.
Hmm.
Um, and they, to me, the reason I'm picturing the eyes in the background is that it's these anonymous lurker people that stress me out, because if I'm just playing with my community, I think I feel quite safe around them because I know that they've already signed up to what we're doing at Carrot Corner. You're part of Carrot Corner as well. You probably pick up on that to some extent as well. That once you're in the company and you're making stuff for Carrot Corner, you're sort of automatically accepted in some sense, right? That's what like
Hmm.
the brand is to me. It's like that's what it means. But when it's people who are just like coming from out with the community, they're not on the Discord, they've not invested in what we're doing already, it feels like there's more of them than they are and that they matter more than they do. So I think you're absolutely right that like very few people are going to actually react in that way, and the ones who aren't our target audience. They're not our customer base generally anyway, and they're not the people we should be catering to or worrying about.
And just to clarify, I was correct in hearing that, within the duration of that sentence, there was this sort of conflation between the trolls and public perception at large, right? Like it almost felt like for the whole audience, you didn't want to open up about these things, even though when we broke it down further, it's only this very small minority that's the real concern. And even then, that they don't really matter.
Yeah, and also like the way you put it, where I can say, I'm going to reset mentally, I'm going to use a technique from mental game coaching. That sounds a lot better than the way I was putting it, which was, my frailty is so intense that I must now behave in a crazy looking way. Like that's kind of how I framed it to you the first time, right? Which is not at all the case.
Right. Well, okay. So even there, like, behaving in a crazy way, I mean, emotions are something that everybody has. Even the trolls have them, right? And they are attempts, for you to kind of communicate with these other parts of yourself. Your anxiety is telling you this environment is unsafe. Your anger is telling you that something about the situation is unjust. And your depression is telling you that something is missing. So these are not crazy. They're natural adaptations that you would be worse off without. Right. So there's really no need to resent them or feel shame about them or try to hide them. And if anything, I think most people, in the Twitch stream, by and large, are going to have a fairly weak mental game, right? They're not professional players for the most part. They're recreational, and they're going to benefit a lot and appreciate a lot seeing you actually handle this, as a role model, showing them what it's like to acknowledge an emotion, process it, and play the hand to the best of your ability in spite of it.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said all that. That makes a ton of sense. And that, like, taking that trio of emotions there and saying what they represent, I've never heard it put like that. Like, yeah, I had an idea that anger was in some sense to do with injustice, and that anxiety was to do with danger, and that depression was to do with like longing. But I never thought about depression saying like something is missing before. That makes a ton of sense. So when this flop comes, it's more, there's a little bit of anger, which is like, couldn't the gods have just given me a 8 deuce deuce flop where I could have stacked villain 99 in front of the audience and felt safer thereafter? The anger is almost about the lack of safety that I was expecting to get from this, and then the anxiety is directly about that lack of safety, and then there's no time for depression in the heat of battle. I suppose that maybe comes after, but yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
The other thing about these cooler type spots or these tough boards is that obviously there's going to be a percentage of any audience that's somewhat results oriented, but there's also going to be a lot of people that I think if they see you stack someone an 8 deuce deuce will be like, yeah, so okay, like next hand, like I don't know. And here they actually get to see some poker.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And that's the thing about Twitch as well. You get rewarded for doing stuff that's not even necessarily good. Like if I make a call that's bad and I win, guaranteed a bunch of people will say incredible call. And that's really hard because like you might in some sense know it wasn't, but that feels so reassuring that you just want to take that at face value. And then when you start doing that, you then become more results oriented yourself. And one of the things I put down on that form you sent me was I want to be less short-term results oriented, but Twitch magnifies results orientation big time.
Yeah. And the flip side of that, I'm sure, must be true as well, that if you jam aces as a bluff on the river and you get called by better, they're like, polarization error.
Yeah. And it might be, in theory, it might be. But in practice, we can sort of throw caution to the wind a little bit when we think Jack X is being so underchecked, right? But I know you know that because you're one of my coaches, and I know that like I wouldn't have hired you if you didn't get that. But with the audience, it's kind of like, well, they're all going to say that, and loads of them will say it at once, and then I will start to believe it a bit. Even if I don't fully believe it, what if 18% of me now believes that was a polarization error, and that 18% just is louder than the 82% that still thinks it's good? So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to look at another hand and then kind of come back? Great.
Okay. So this is maybe quite similar. We call ace queen off here against hijack. This wasn't a community member or anything. We get a flop of ace 9-7. On this flop, I had a few fleeting thoughts, right? So the first one, so this is so weird, right, Sebastian? This spot is so weird what happened in my brain here. Again, super standard spot. Clearly call is going to be the main line in the solver. And then I started going, my instinct was like, I'm just going to call because I don't know if ace queen is too thin to raise or not against this sizing. But then something said, they expect you to know if ace queen is too thin or not to raise against this sizing. You should know. It's like some golem in my head, like, they expect it, they need it, they needs to know. And I'm like, well, okay, well in that case, I'm going to have to try and work it out. So then I decided that it probably wasn't too thin at a really low frequency. And then my brain went, so I'm going to just RNG and I'll only do it like 8% of the time. And then probably I won't have to deal with raising here because that won't come up. And then I rolled a 3 out of 100 and low numbers aggressive. And then I had to raise. But like, I'd rather not have raised because against pool, I don't actually think it's best, even if it is permissible in GTO. I don't even know if it's permissible in GTO in these positions against the sizing. So that was the first thing that went wrong. Mentally. Okay, gone wrong. Shouldn't say that. That was the first challenge that I'm going to get better at dealing with in future. You can tell I've done therapy before, right? 3 of spades. Check. Bet. So now we check call, river goes check, check, and there's not really much to say. Like, we lose to ace king. I think Villain played it pretty well. But my flop dialogue here was just so weird. And it was like I was prioritizing all kinds of things that I don't think it should be. So yeah, what do you think about this?
Well, in terms of the strategy of the hand, I do think you're right that ace queen is going to be a low frequency raise. I think basically it's just raise is going to be better against people that check the turn a lot and realize equity, and call is going to be better against people that barrel the turn with a lot of bluffs and worse ace x.
Yep.
But this hand is just high enough equity that it just gets in there at some frequency. So yeah, I think that's good. They expect me to know.
Yeah.
Who is they? Is it everybody? It's the entire audience?
No, it's definitely more people this time than the last one. Like, I think there's more people who expect me to know this. I could be wrong here. Than the people who would have judged me for like doing a mental game exercise on a flop. Like, I think it's slightly more, but I still think that it's not that many now that you ask me.
I mean, you know this as well as I do, that most poker players are just guessing half the time, and then they're double checking afterwards and being like, oh, cool, that was fairly right, or oh my god, I'm way off, right? And lots and lots of colleagues I expect are right a ton of the time and impressive, and then wrong a ton of the time, and they're like, I don't no idea why was that wrong, right? You know, like, oh, I don't think we donk this board, and then it's donked 50% of the time or something. And you're like, what the? And so I think that your audience probably knows that. Right? I think a lot of people that don't work with solvers are impressed anytime your guess is close, because it's tough. It takes work. So yeah, I would wonder if there's a way of pushing back on a lot of these assumptions about what you're projecting onto the whole audience, what you think the whole audience is believing about you at all times. I mean, it's a large group of people, right? They don't have one opinion. There's a lot of different people here who are kind of in the middle, maybe a bit skeptical. You know, there are probably some audience members for whom you can do no wrong. There's probably some audience members who really like you but see you in a realistic way, right? There's this whole gambit of possibilities. And so when you catch yourself making absolute statements about what they expect or what they believe or what they feel, that's where I want you to kind of stop yourself and say, okay, I'm making an assumption here about about something I don't have evidence for.
Yeah, I guess it's like I'm ignoring the majority of the people who are probably just like very tolerant. I can be fallible and can make mistakes and I'm a human. I'm sort of ignoring them because they don't threaten me, whereas the ones who are going to say, this guy's always been a phony scammer, and they can say that to me just after I've lost the pot, and when I'm already feeling vulnerable, they can threaten me, right? As much as I'd like to sit here and say, they don't matter, they're just better trolls, blah blah blah, and I could take that approach, that's not actually how I feel about it. Like, I think that bullies can hurt you because they can get you at a time when you're vulnerable, they can get you in a certain way when they know like what you're vulnerable to, and haters can hurt you because they just randomly spew out hate and it catches you off guard or it catches you in the wrong moment or whatever. And these things are more threatening than people who are just going to be like, oh yeah, you know, I get that he's not meant to know exactly where every threshold is. I don't normally face this sizing, and I don't play a lot of pots big blind against hijack compared to like late position. So like if you give me a big blind button 1/3, I probably know exactly where the thresholds are. You give me hijack versus big blind half pot or whatever this is, I'm going to be much more like, I'm guessing a bit more now. But then I'm projecting that same like I should know because they want me to know onto this. I guess part of it's also about not wanting to let down people who do think I'm good at poker and do think I'm a good coach and do like Carrot Corner. I also want to like make the brand look strong for them and be right for them as well and not disappoint. So does that too.
Yeah. So it's pressure both to defend yourself from the trolls and to reward and not let down the people that are in your corner. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Just to talk about the trolls for a minute, I'm sure you've thought about trolls a lot and talked about trolls a lot, but one way that I've been thinking about it recently is, I mean, they bother me a lot too, and I know why, which is unlike you, I was bullied a lot as a kid, and just had I kind of became a well-adjusted person over time, but it's a sort of a skill I had to learn. And so when people are trying to make me feel small or belittling me or behaving in a way I can tell is not appropriate for just our social norms, I'm immediately like, this is not right. I'm not going to be, don't put me back in that spot. And so I very much relate to this feeling of feeling vulnerable in the face of trolls. But, I guess one interesting thing is the question of where do they come from and why do they exist, right? Like what is their investment in your success or failure? And the way that I usually think about it is that, people can affect change through creation or through destruction. Like those are the two ways that they can feel control over something. And so people that are really invested in someone else's failure, to me, what it signals is that there's something in their life that makes them feel that they don't have a lot of control. They want to have something back.
Yep.
And if I actually remember that and have a little bit of compassion for what seems actually like a difficult way to move through the world, believe it or not, it sort of takes some of the sting out of what it is, at least for me. Now, this is not really therapy techniques or anything. It's just sort of philosophizing. Yeah. But I don't know if that resonates with you at all or if you've thought about it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard something along the same vein as that recently, which was these people who are upsetting you or bullying you or whatever, they'll be dead in like 90 years. Like there'll be a gravestone and their skeleton will be under there, and that's what's going to happen to them. And these kind of thoughts, I guess, are along the same vein. They're like sort of stressing the sort of limit of the individual and that they are just these vulnerable themselves. They have deficiencies themselves. They have problems themselves. They're not like these oppressive demonic overlords. That's the ultimate fear for the human is Satan, right? Like, to put it into like a biblical metaphor, an all-powerful, all-bad, omniscient, omnipotent, malevolent being, right? Just as like the God is the all-good, right? That's the ultimate fear. And it's easy to see a collection of trolls as scarily powerful because of their anonymity as well. Because I can't say, listen, mate, if you've got a fucking problem with me, let's talk about it. Like, you thought I was going to say let's fight outside. It wasn't. Just because I'm Scottish, it doesn't mean I was going to say that. Editor insert Scottish people brawling and smashing bottles over each other's heads. Like, we feel like there are monsters and we demonize things, right? Because we're always wired to like preserve our own safety and avoid the ultimate things that can kill us, the ultimate evils. And I think if we go back to this hand, the people in the community the people in the audience who are going to say something nasty in chat, they just feel more relevant at the time, and that's how I make them into like the whole audience, right? Because they're the only ones who are going to try and hurt me if I lose the spot. It's not going to be, that loyal fan that's always on there encouraging me every time I stream. It's not going to be them that says something shitty. The other thing I want to point out is that there's a difference between criticism and nastiness. And when people post, you actually suck at cards with 6 laughing faces, we know that that's like kind of pathetic, right? We see that as what it is. That's nastiness, it's malevolence. When someone says something that could be true, and then puts 5 laughing faces. That's where it gets hard, because it's hard to like pick out the objective criticism. And I was actually, at some point, I remember getting a criticism where someone had said something like, this guy brands everyone who gives him negative feedback as a troll. And I actually think that's a really fair point, that it wouldn't be correct to just take any negative feedback and say that person doesn't like me, therefore they're a troll. And therefore it's hard sometimes, because in nasty comments, there may be truth, or it may be brutally honest feedback that feels a bit scathing. And I never want to be someone who can't take criticism, right? So that's another, that in some sense makes me feel more vulnerable, that I do want to be able to take criticism. I don't just want to shut it all down and label it all as trolls that have loads of problems in their own lives and live entropic lives or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a question of whether or not, there's one thing to provide valid criticism, and then there may be some subtext or like an implication for what they're saying because of that criticism, which maybe is not in the comment, but based on that person's comment history or the emojis or whatever. I mean, if it's Pete makes mistakes, so Pete should be canceled. I mean, that is not that's not a logical device there. But Pete made a mistake here, and here's why. Obviously, that is something you'd be more receptive to, right? So if I see you pushing back, it's probable that you're pushing back because of that second half of what's implied, or what that person, maybe you're making a mistake and they don't really mean that, but I can see a lot of times there's a troll who has a valid point, but they're still being a troll because there's something at the end of that sentence, you know? But the trick is, and it's difficult, but I think it's possible to recognize that there are actually 2 parts to their claim. Right. The first part is there's a mistake here, and the second part is therefore your brand is bad and whatever else.
Yeah, so I can actually take the substance and sort of extract it out and look at that objectively, and then say, however, you're still being a piece of shit because your intention is still to upset me and cause hurt right now.
Yeah, and just because something is not perfect does not mean that the whole thing doesn't have value, right?
Totally. It's like if my fiance forgot to put the ham back in the fridge after making a sandwich, and I was like, you're such a stupid person for not doing that. Like, you will never get anywhere in life because of that 6 laughing emojis.
Exactly.
I probably made a valid point that, like, it's better if we can learn to put the ham. This has never happened, by the way. She's never once left the ham out, just in case she ever watches this. It's a random example. There's a valid point there, which is like, oh, let's try and put the food back in the fridge so like we don't waste food. But equally, like, clearly the way I've handled the situation is like 100 times more bad than making that point was good.
Right.
And I think that's often what the troll comments are. There's substance there that's true to, like, 3 points of value, and then there's like being a dick for 180 points of value. And it's like, well, what am I to take from that, really? And
that's why abuse is more potent the closer someone is, right? The more their criticism is actually valid, and the more that conflation becomes difficult to avoid.
Right.
So, yeah.
Cool. Okay. Final hand.
Yeah, final hand, and then I have one last quick thing for you, and we'll stop there. We won't pontificate too long.
Awesome. I'm really enjoying this, so I hope the audience is too. Guys, let us know what you think about this kind of session. I thought I would find this really daunting and scary, but actually I'm finding it really helpful and almost like a relief to talk about some of this stuff on my YouTube channel. So
nice.
So we called a 3-bet here with ace queen. The flop came 9-8 deuce, and villain bet half pot. I think against half pot we're a little closer to folding big over cards with the queen of clubs than usual. Against small blind we're a bit closer to folding it than against big blind. There's some reasons for that in theory. I still think, however, that this is probably a pure continue, so I opted to continue. I don't think raise is great here in position with such a showdown value-y overcard combo, so I think call is right. Villain bet the turn, and I don't think this really matters what I do here. I think this is very close for what it's worth. The solver said something like, when you have the queen of clubs you fold, and you mostly fold, and then you pure call without the queen of clubs, or something like this. In game, I felt it was close, and if I hadn't been feeling pressure, I would have just said, therefore I don't really care what I do. I'd have tried to think about true EV and exploits and maybe like pick the line based on that. But I wasn't really getting anywhere with that in game here. And so instead of just saying, like, you can be torn or you can be close, right? like, or you can be lost. So there's two types of a spot being close. Something I say to my students. You're either torn or you're lost. And if you're lost, it's because you've not studied the spot enough yet, and you just need to work on it, and that's fine. There'll be tons of spots you've not studied enough yet. And if you're torn, it's because like someone said, do you want this Big Mac or this Big Mac? And you're like, well, they're both Big Macs. Like, why do I really have to choose? Just give me a Big Mac. So here I feel it's more like give me a burger, right? It's like they're the same thing. Whether I call or fold here, I don't think it matters that much. But for some reason in game, this was giving me a ton of anxiety. And I just think that like when I'm streaming, spots that don't actually matter that much, and I know don't matter that much, begin to stress me out in a way that they wouldn't normally. So the thing I'm bringing to the table here is, because I don't know which line is better in real life, and because I feel uncertainty as to that, that's enough to make me feel pretty vulnerable. Just the fact that I have that uncertainty and it's being publicly broadcast. So again, it's the same leak, right? We're trying to get me better at accessing my A game in front of a live audience. That's what this is all about, right? It's about overcoming this sort of stage fright that I wouldn't get making a YouTube video, because YouTube is just so different. It's like you have more control over it. Again, I want to stress that I don't feel that with YouTube.
Yeah,
but yeah, what
anxiety
do you
is
think
about control. So if you have control, that makes sense. You don't have anxiety.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is the sort of the same pattern. It's about not knowing which option is best. And here the trolls are really loud because we know both options are not a big mistake. So we can't even make a big mistake here. But then there's still this sort of pressure that someone is going to judge you for maybe what they're going to be like. I am an all-knowing god of population tendencies and have determined that this is a one big blind true EV loss. I am the master of true EV. And right, so there's definitely the anxiety is doing some pretzels there to get us to bow to its expectations. So in psychology, everyone's familiar with the idea of exposure therapy, right? Like if you're afraid of dogs, you look at a photo of a dog and then you go pet a dog, and eventually you're cured of your exposure, your fear of dogs. Okay, so you have this fear of being perceived as human on stream. Making mistakes, feeling emotions, needing to account for your emotions, etc. And so the exposure therapy prescription in this circumstance would be, next time you feel like I can't say I'm feeling nervous, you just got to find it in you to say it. And next time you say this, I'm not sure. You feel like saying I'm not sure what's best here. Right? You got to be able to say it. And if you get more used to being honest about those things on stream, I think what will come later is, I'm not sure, and I'm going to do X because it's my best guess. Because now you know the truth, that I'm not always sure. I don't know what's best, and this is one of those times.
Yeah,
right.
That's awesome. I feel like I have to solve it like before the clock ticks down to 0 for them. And then if I don't solve it, there's something wrong with me. And then the clock ticking is louder and louder than it should be. And I'm hyper aware of like where the time bank's at as well. When I'm playing on stream, sometimes I'm like, oh, there's only 18 seconds to decide whether to call or fold this turn. I don't even think I'd spend 18 seconds on this normally. I think I would just be like, okay, let's just RNG this. It's too close. I just don't know.
Right. Right. I don't know. I mean, for me as an audience member, like I not grew up, but I would watch Jarrett Man when I was getting into poker and stuff. And the best was always when they were torn and unsure. Right. To see someone really think through something and try to solve a problem was when I was most interested, and often even had like the most admiration for them, because that seemed like, they're overcoming adversity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's what heroism is all about, right? And that's what you are to some extent as like a public figure, is you're doing something in a way that shows other people how they can do it better or whatever. So it would be really disingenuous for me on stream to be like, this is just this, and I'm going to hide the way I feel. I'm going to hide the fact I'm unsure about it. That would be almost like saying to people they should just be sure all the time. It'd be like, instead of poker therapy being a book about here are your misfires that are happening and here's protocols for treating them, it'd be like saying, well, what do you mean you're not already perfect? It'd be like a one-line book that's like, oh, you've got weaknesses and frailties. Well, that's on you, bro. And that'd be the end of the book. That'd be a
like
book.
A really toxic Instagram influencer, something or other.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the way I've ever been as a coach. I've always been super like humanizing to my students. I've always tried to therapize them, even in like technical sessions, I'd always like try and go to a mental game leak if it was like clearly there, even if that wasn't the student's original intent. And another criticism I've had leveled at me, and some of them stick in my head when I think there's truth to them, right? The ones that aren't real, that don't seem true, don't bother me. Like you said before, it's easier to conflate it when there's a bit of truth to it. And someone had said something like, he thinks he knows everything. And I'm like, no, I don't. I definitely don't. Like, where the hell have you got that from? But then when I think about the way I try and avoid showing uncertainty, that's a defense mechanism, and I can see how someone might get the impression that I think I know everything. My response to that was, I know a lot about the stuff I choose to teach in a YouTube video or in a course because I've researched it thoroughly, and I'd like to think I've presented it well, and I'm very confident in that. And then when I'm playing, there's shit I just don't know, but maybe I'm hiding the stuff I don't know. But then equally, imagine making a course and being like, not sure about this, guys, sorry, just not gonna. Like, you can't do that in a course, right? So it's like conflating those two types of media. The medium of the Carrot Poker School, a massive course that's comprehensive, and like everything that's stated there is fully proven by solver output and explanations of that output, and then like having 9 seconds to digest a spot on stream. And it's like conflating that you're not meant to have the same certainty about the latter as you do the former.
That's right. Yeah. No, we're never going to be able to arrive at the same certainty as we will when we're researching a course, for sure. Yeah. So okay, and so it sounds like that person's criticism resonated with you enough that you feel some of that truth of that way you're avoiding vulnerability.
Yeah, but I didn't realize until our session today why they thought that. I was like, how could you have got that idea? And now I'm like, I can see why they got that idea.
So it may be something that you run into resistance to at first. Old habits die hard, like when you're on stream. But you can even write down like just a quick jot note of a couple of your goals before your next streaming session, and you can say one of the goals will be honesty and vulnerability as bracket exposure therapy or something.
Yeah.
And keep that in the back of your mind as something that you're taking into the session. The last thing I wanted to leave you with, I know we've made a long video now, whoops, but the last thing I wanted to leave you with is the idea of resetting when you feel that dread and anxiety coming on. I don't know if you're a guy who's done a lot of meditation or anything like that.
Nope.
Okay, so a lot of meditation is really about awareness of what's happening internally, as much as we have awareness of what's happening externally, right? So we're usually like, my cell phone's going off, my baby is crying, my girlfriend she left the ham out of the fridge, right? And we're not really paying attention to where we're seated, where we can feel the weight of gravity in the chair, where the tension is in our body, and all of these different things. Now, I'm not going to say do a 10-minute meditation in the middle of the hand, right? But when you feel these emotions coming on, all I want you to do is do your best to leave all of your thoughts, put them down for a second, okay? So the example that works best for me is if I play 2500 NL, I'm nervous. I'm just really nervous, and I worry about judgment too from the stronger players. So if I'm gonna be I can see myself doing it right now. If I'm gonna be in a 3-bet pot, I literally just feel where my feet are planted on the floor. Ask myself what my expectations are for the hand. Kind of remind myself that I'm going to focus on what I think is the correct play, regardless of how uncomfortable it is. I take a deep breath. And this whole time, I know I'm going to 3-bet. Like, I know I've got ace queen off and it's a 3-bet, right? But I just kind of check in with myself and I leave all of the noise behind. I don't have to make a decision right away. And so when you get that flop that's not favorable, some version of this sort of micro meditation is what I'm going to recommend, where all of the other thoughts are let go for a moment. Feel where your feet are, feel the pressure of your butt in the chair. Notice what emotions are coming through. And if you can, try to let them pass by. And be like, I'm in a hand now. That's what we're doing now. We're not listening to these emotions. We're not worrying about what's going to happen. We're not thinking about the trolls. Now we're just going to spend the next minute on this hand. You can't always be on your A game, but you can kind of control it for those short doses or the short bursts when you realize these emotions are attempting to hijack. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It just places you in the present moment and allows you to not get like another one of our coaches, Jared Alderman, formerly known as Jalderman, not to be confused with Jarrett, man, is he said to me, like, you either notice before you get swept up in the current and like sucked into the vortex, I'm paraphrasing here, or you don't. And only by noticing can you stop that happening. So like jumping into the emotions just amplifies them and, you know, gives them validation and feeds them almost. It's like feeding the beast, right? So this is a way of like saying, I'm aware of like my whole state right now and my whole existence as a human in this chair. And because of that, I can see the emotions as only part of the landscape picture and not the entire picture.
Perfect. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I talk a good game, but my mental game's trash.
Well, it sounds like you're using humor as a defense mechanism there. I think your mental game is fine, Pete. You're under a lot of pressure. People go crazy being public figures. They literally go crazy. Like people all the time. Kanye West has gone crazy. You are less famous than Kanye West, but it shows us something about the stress of being a public facing person, right? So I think it's good that you are interested in self-care for it. It might be something, you know, worth going back to therapy for it, just in the sense that I don't think it is something people deal with easily. But yeah, I don't think you need to be so hard on yourself. This is a new challenge, and you're handling it just fine.
Yeah, and I'm glad I did this because it's easy to hide from the things you're most scared of. But another one of my favorite quotes is that if something's really scary, it's probably the exact thing that you should be doing.
Totally.
When I was a kid, I didn't want to go on this roller coaster, and my mum's partner at the time, he pressured me to go on the roller coaster because he really wanted to go on the roller coaster. Not because he thought it would be good for me or anything. It definitely wasn't like that. But nevertheless, I went on the damn roller coaster and I was scared as hell, like walking up the queue. And then I was scared as hell as it started going. But man, it was like the best roller coaster ever. And when I walked back to the caravan site that we were staying in that night, I felt like the big dog. I was like a 9-year-old kid, but I was like, I'm the fucking boss of this entire seaside town. And I think it's just like you grow as a person and you grow as a man, the more you actually confront the things that you're scared of. And that's why I wanted to do this. Today I was coming back from the gym and I was like, well, this will be a new challenge. This will be a bit terrifying. And I was a bit anxious. That's why I did the deep breath, the gulp thing when we started talking. Because I was like, shit, this started. This is the real thing. But more people need mental game coaching. More people need to look at this side of their game. You guys out there need to do this too. And you need to find a mental game coach. Sebastian is one such option. I think it's only fair that you should tell him a bit about your coaching and your videos or anything you want to talk about at this point. You've helped me immensely, and I would highly recommend you to people, but where can they find you?
Sure. Yeah. I'm available on 2+2 poker coaching under my username on Poker Francatch. You can find me under Kali in the Carrot Corner Discord server. You can find me my website, kalipokercoaching.ca, or you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Kali Poker.
Okay, so we'll pop the website and the YouTube channel in the description. And I think we'll do a follow-up in a month or two, and we'll see if it's cool with you, Sebastian. We'll see how I'm getting on. But yeah, this has been amazingly helpful. I really hope the audience can look at this and think, maybe just start to turn the lens away from the technical stuff a little bit and just ask themselves if they are being held back by some mental game things like I am being. So
great. Thanks, Pete. That was fun.
Thanks, man. All right, guys. Catch you later. See you in the next video.